University College of Washington University and KC, the St. Louis Education Vision Station, present a course for television. The Religions of Man, with Dr. Houston, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Washington University.
In our study of the religions of man, we begin with the East. Why? Because that's where the religions began. It's a very curious thing, but all the great living religions of the world today, even those which by now have migrated over to the West, all of them had their origin in the Orient. Taoism and Confucianism began in China. Buddhism and Hinduism, of course, began in India. Islam began in Arabia. And even our own religions, Judaism and Christianity, began in Palestine, the Near East. So that's why in this course we begin with the East. The East is a long way off. I know, of course, that we can get there very easily now. We can get there very quickly. But it's still a long way. It really is a different world. I've lived there half my life, and I've seen some very strange things, some things which still continue to haunt me when I wake up in the middle of the night, some things which I still haven't been able to figure out quite how they add together, or how people would see these things in order to make sense of them. On top of all that, we've got some strange ideas ourselves about the East, and that doesn't help either. On the one hand, there are some people who still regard the East with a kind of contempt. They are the backward peoples of the world. They are almost still, at least only semi-civilized, in Kipling's phrase, clothed in a twisted rag in front and arf of that behind. Yes, there are plenty of people in the West who still regard the East with a kind of contempt. And then at the opposite extreme, there are Westerners who regard the East with a kind of stony gaze, of fascination and awe. These are the people who always see the East as somehow mysterious and strange and occult, fantastic, even fabulous. They're the ones that assume that in insects, in the East, the insects must be larger than they are here. The rivers must be wider. And when it rains in the East, it must really rain. That kind of person who can't look to the East without assuming some sort of exotic or fabulous quality. Well, we have a difficult job this evening, trying to pierce through some of these misconceptions and trying to understand that which, it's true, does have a kind of intrinsic difference from our own perspective. We're going to have to work a little in order to take this journey into the minds and spirits of a people who have been separated from us through the centuries by the distances of space. Let me give you just one example of the problem that the West has in in understanding the East. This is a kind of trivial example, and yet I think it may point to something that we have to face. The British, when they went into India, for example, when they went into India, they noticed that some of the things about the religious art, the architecture, the sculpture, and the literature itself seemed to them, from their point of view, as quite indecent, really obscene from their Victorian perspective. And so what did they do? Well, they slapped on in their colonial code, postal code, the provision which they had in their own country, namely, read, no obscene literature may be sent through the mail. And yet somehow things didn't go right. It didn't seem quite right. In time they realized that the categories of decent and indecent, which were meaningful in their own country, somehow weren't applying here. These people looked on this material in really a very different sense. It really wasn't indecent at all. Their attitude was predecent. The categories which held so fast in England, Victorian England, somehow didn't fit at all in this different climate. And eventually they came to see this to the point that they didn't rescind, but they modified their provision. And as I understand it, the British colonial postal code still reads today, no obscene literature may be sent through the mail, parenthesis, unless it be religious, parenthesis closed. Well, this perhaps may indicate to you something of the kind of problem which one people may have in understanding another. Well, let's not have the impression that everything we find in the East is going to be different. You're going to find some old friends, too, in these ideas. You're going to find some things that ring true and echo. They'll sound like things you've heard before. Echoes, perhaps, of the Psalms, echoes of the New Testament. You will find, for example, Confucius saying, do not do unto other people what you don't want them to do to you, which, of course, is just another way of saying our own golden rule. You'll find, for example, a parallel when Christ said, love your enemies. We will find in the Dhammapada of the Buddhist literature a comparable phrase where it says, he robbed me, he beat me, he abused me. In the minds of those who think like this, hatred will never cease. Thus love, too, is to be given even to those who pour abuse upon you. And again, the New Testament phrase, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, will find its exact echo in the Buddhist literature. Everything you are is the result of what you have thought. Well, we'll find some difference, some strangeness, but also similarity. Just one last word by way of introduction and approach. We're not going to try in these lectures to give you a rounded view of these religions. Some of the things in them will seem to us as crude, as gross, as vulgar, and they are. I'm sure there are some things. Religion is so inclusive, covers so much of life, that every religion includes some bad elements as well as some good. Those who were studying Christianity, if they were coming from abroad, could find Christianity down in the Ozarks associated with snake worship, with poisonous snakes wrapped around the necks of the devotees. They could bring that in as a part of Christianity if they wanted to. No, just as a music teacher giving a history of music doesn't bother to go into all the bad music which has been written down through the ages. Similarly, I don't see that it's our job to bring out all the bad and the low. No, our time is limited, and I want to center with you on that which is best just as an art teacher reviewing the ages will also lift out for consideration that which is best. Now, let's go to our first religion. Let's go to India. I've spoken of why we should go to the East, but why India? Well, you have to start somewhere, that's one reason, but there's another reason for beginning with India. It's probably the oldest of the great historical religions. Some of the things which are meaningful in the lives of millions of Hindus today go back, what? Well, between 4,000 and 5,000 years. They've been dug up in excavations and dated that far back. That's a terribly long time as far as human history goes. This is the time of the comparable to the time of the Egyptians and the Babylonians, the Mesopotamian religions. Those too were mighty religions in their own day, but they've gone, leaving us nothing but the pyramids and a few other artifacts. But this religion, which in part was contemporary with those, this religion has endured and animates and motivates the lives of countless millions in our world today. Now, to begin, what does Hinduism say to man? Well, if I had to take the vast literature of Hinduism, all the rituals, the rites, and boil it down to what strikes me as its central affirmation, I think I would put it this way. Hinduism says to man, you can have what you want. You can have what you want. Well, that sounds very good, but it immediately suggests the next question. What do you want? Now, this one's not quite so easy. It's very easy to give a simple answer. It turns out to be very difficult to give a good answer. And the reason, of course, is that people want different things. What do they want? Well, I suppose most people want four things. They want pleasure, agreeable sensations, aesthetic, good food, the happiness of the physical senses. Then again, they want wealth. I heard someone say the other day, they said, happiness isn't everything. After all, it can't buy money, can it? Well, this indicates in a very telling way how important many people think wealth is. But there's something else. Fame. If only I were to be exalted above my fellow men, if only people were to admire me, to speak in hushed voices when I enter their circle with adulation, then the joys of life would come to me. Finally, there's a fourth thing, which dawns perhaps later than these other two. There are many men who want power. These four things the Hindus speak of as the worldly desires, because these are the desires of most people in the world as far as one observes their actions. Now, what is the attitude of Hinduism towards these desires? And here's an important point, because in the West we have frequently, we've really come to the conclusion that India is very otherworldly and is therefore takes a negative stand on desires. It's against them. It's opposed to them. Much scholarship actually came to that conclusion in the 19th century. But we're coming to discover that we misunderstood in this point. She is not ascetic in the sense of being antagonistic to these things. No, these are perfectly legitimate desires. You have a perfect right. If this is what you want, Hinduism would say, go to it. Only, you might be intelligent. It will pay you to be intelligent as you go about seeking these things, because some ways will lead you to them, some ways will not. Now, how do you be intelligent? What do you observe? What advice should you follow when seeking these things? And Hinduism says three things at this score. First of all, it says, don't hurt other people as you go after these things. Don't trample them underfoot, because if you do, then this will unleash other passions against you, and in the end it won't pay off. We don't have time to say anything more about this here, but simply to say, observe the basic principles of human decency and fair play. In other words, observe basic morality as you go about these things. But, second, there's something else to watch. And that is that in seeking these things, you should find your proper place in life. What is your appropriate niche? Because, you see, people have different capacities, different endowments. And if you try to fit yourself in a vocation, in a way of life, which is counter to your basic nature, then no success will ensue. Now, this division of people according to their natures is the basis of the caste system, and I want to take a moment for it. They say then that there are four kinds of people. They call them the four castes. First of all, there are what we might call the intellectual leaders and spiritual. These are the priests, but as religion and thought were really bound together in India, this would include the teachers, too, the teachers who would always have a spiritual emphasis. Then next would come they called them warriors in the next class because this was a time of trouble, but really the temporal leaders, I think perhaps the administrators. And then there were the artisans, or the merchants, those who were economically very productive, and finally there were the laborers. These are the people who think, for whom thought is tremendously important. These are ones who are the builders, the organizers, who make society run in its administrative side. These are the economically productive, and these are those whose time span is short, who really had better do better working for other people. We, with our democracy, don't like to acknowledge that there is a class of such persons, but they said, well, maybe we would like it to be different, but actually there are some people who, left to their own initiative, their own enterprise, would not get as far, would not be as happy but they can be very good in terms of working for other people. What should we do to get these? First, observe the basic principles of morality. Second, find our appropriate place, station in life. And third, they said, evolve, because life develops. And they said life develops through 4 stages. The stage of the student in the early years, when your main responsibility is to learn everything you can. Second, there is the stage of the householder, when you should marry, have a family, take part in the civic life of the community. And then, however, when you get to be about 50, after you've given yourself to society in the vigor an imagination of your social life, there will come a time as the strength begins to ebb, the physical strength, when you really ought to pull out of this and let the junior executives take your place of responsibility in society while you go into retirement, the third stage, and begin your adult education. All these years you haven't had time to read, to think. But before you die, you ought to have that opportunity. So the third and fourth period becomes more contemplative, more turned inward. Let me just review then. These wants are the wants of the world. They're good rather than bad, basically. And if this is what you want, go after it. Only remember 3 points. Observe the principles of basic morality. Find your station in life, and don't be truncated in your development. Pass through a rounded stage of the life of the student, the life of the householder, and then in the last 2 periods, the life of contemplation, reflection, so that before you die, you can come to some understanding of what this was all about through the years anyway. Now, these are good things, but now we come to the really interesting question. Are they all that life has to offer? Well, we can see some reasons, they would say, for hoping at least, that this is not all that life can attain. There are 4 limitations which inhere in these things. Let's know what they are. First of all, sometimes they are unattainable. Maybe we want to make 1 million, maybe we're caught in adverse circumstances and we can't get what we want. Sometimes they're unattainable. There's another defect, though, limitation, and that is often when we find them, we get them. When we get them, we find that they don't bring the true satisfaction which we were expecting from them. This, in a way, seems to me almost the story of contemporary America. People giving their lives to getting things which, when they get them, don't bring the satisfaction which they had hoped. Ross Lockbridge writes a book through years of poverty, and then when it is accepted and it becomes a bestseller, Raintree County, as he goes to receive the great award, after he has received it, then he commits suicide. He got what he wanted, but it didn't bring him the satisfaction he hoped. Then there is a third. There is a third limitation in these, and that is that if you, they would say, make these the main ambition of your life, then they become insatiable. Are they insatiable in their own right? No. No. In their proper place, they're not. It's not true to say a man can never be satisfied with the wealth he has or the fame he has or the power he has. But they will say that if this is the central concern of his life, then it will tend to be insatiable. Why? Because, and here I'm anticipating, this is not what man really wants. And men can never get enough of what they do not really want. And so, they would say, ultimately, if you build your life around these things, you'll never get enough of them. As they put it, it's like trying to quench a fire by pouring butterfat on it to try to quench our desire for these things in just going after them. Now, there's a final reason why these things do not satisfy, ultimately, and that is because they're fleeting. They must come to an end, and this we know very well, because you can't take these things with you. That's our way of putting it, but it is true. We all know sooner or later these come to an end. All right, now the question is, we see that these have their limitations, Is there anything more? And this, I suppose, is the big question behind all religions, and people line up on both sides of this question. Some of them will say, no, I wish it were true. Hemingway would say, I wish it were true, but it's not. Tolstoy would say, yes, it is true. But in any event, the Hindus will say, there will come a time when these things will lose their charm. They're like toys which satisfy people in certain stages of their development, but there comes a time when they will not satisfy the longings of the human heart. Now, when that time comes, one will say, as Huxley said on one occasion, there comes a time when one asks, even of Shakespeare, even of Beethoven, is this all? Now, in our closing moments, turn with me to this symbol. This is a symbol for Om, is what it's called. We're going to be saying more about this symbol as time goes on. Behind, in the background, is a solid color. It looks like black, but it's not really in the original. It's dark green. Black symbolizes nothingness. This, however, dark green, symbolizes utter being, complete being. The rays that go out here symbolize utter consciousness, not thinking about one or two things, but pure consciousness, undivided by objects. And this part in here, with its exuberant quality, indicates what is sometimes translated bliss, but better translated the absence of all frustration, all sense of futility. What is this? This is the Hindu view of God. God is that which is infinite, and nothing less will satisfy the spirit of man. He is infinite, and you can't really divide infinity, but we can put it this way. He is infinite in existence, pure being, not partial, limited being, but utter being. He is awareness, and he is utter joy beyond all sense of limitations, all frustrations, and all possible boredom. This, then, is God, which is the true goal of human life. Now, one last point. We've had to cover it very quickly, and next time we're going to have time to go into how this is achieved. But the last point is that that which is without as God is also within as God. In other words, the utmost essence of the human spirit is divine. And so it is that the Upanishads put this point in their writings. That supreme self is not this, nothing material that you can point to. It is unseizable, for it cannot be seized. It is indestructible, for it cannot be destroyed. It is unattached, for it does not attach itself to anything. It is unbound. It does not tremble. It is not injured. The whole world has that as its soul. That thou art.
The Religions of Man is produced by Washington University and KETC Channel 9, the St. Louis Educational Television and Production Center.
This is NET, National Educational Television.